Massive warning for the North Carolina housing market with breaking news of potential mass deportations, the Federal Reserve triggering uncertainty, and a possible wave of quiet foreclosures. The question is now the right time to buy or a terrible time to buy a home? And to answer this question, first we need to understand what's going to happen to home prices this year. Homes are more expensive than ever with the Housing Affordability Index and the ratio of median income to qualifying income both being the worst we've ever seen, which means that more people can't afford to buy a home than can for the first time ever. But the question is, why are they getting so expensive? And the word I keep hearing everybody say is a bubble. And I want you to understand why this is so important. There's two primary drivers of prices going up. There's demand surplus and there's supply shortage. So for instance, the bubble of 2006 was primarily driven because there were more people that wanted to buy a house than needed to. And that was largely driven by speculation. And what makes it so interesting about this time around and so much more difficult is we're actually in a supply shortage for a couple of very interesting reasons. But if you go back to 2018, 2019, we were in a shortage of about 2.6 to 2.8 million homes. And now that's over doubled to over 5 million homes short today versus just a few years ago. And you can even see this in the percent of housing units that are vacant in 2006 versus today. So the only way to fix our current housing crisis is to either lower demand or increase supply or both. Now, while every builder I know is already building as quickly as they can, headlines you may have seen about potential mass deportations in 2025 may actually be really important for the evolution of the housing market this coming year, 2, 3 years. And that's because somewhere between 11 to 20 million illegal migrants are in the country. We don't know exactly how many, but what we do know is the 6 states that have the highest populations of illegal migrants also have some of the highest rates of relocation. And personally, what I've always heard is that they have such high appreciation in those states that owning has become pretty much unbearable because of how short housing supply is. And so only the highest earners are able to actually afford buying a home under those circumstances. Now, as a secondary effect, what I would watch for going into this next year, 2, 3 years is going to be a slow decline in the rate of relocation from some of these more expensive states to more inexpensive states as it becomes more feasible for people to stay put when they really like everything else other than housing unaffordability. So does that mean that now is going to be potentially a good or bad time to buy? Well, it's going to depend on what happens with rates over this coming year. To understand that, what affects rates? The Federal Reserve is the governing body that sets monetary policy here in the US, and they have a dual mandate. 2 things. 1 is to keep inflation low, and 2, to keep the jobs market strong. Now, inflation is currently being driven primarily by the cost of housing, and as job markets have also begun to falter and stumble a little bit, everyone's been looking to the Fed for guidance in terms of what to expect. And at the most recent press conference, here's what Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, had to say.
The economy is strong overall and has made significant progress toward our goals over the past 2 years. The labor market has cooled from its formerly overheated state and remains solid.
Which sounds pretty good on the surface, but to encourage economic growth, Jerome Powell announced that the Fed is cutting their prime rate, the rate that the Federal Reserve lends money to other banks at, by 25 basis points or 1/4%. But he also said that future cuts are still going to be data dependent, and how this affected mortgage rates specifically is going to surprise you. Before we get into the exact effect, first you need to understand exactly how mortgage rates work. When you take out a mortgage, there's an investor on the other side who lends you the money. When the Federal Reserve communicates clearly about what they intend to do moving forward with monetary policy, investors who lend money for mortgages know exactly what to expect. So they charge borrowers just a little bit more than what the Federal Reserve charges them to borrow the money to lend out. But if they don't know what to expect from the Fed, then investors will charge a lot more than what the Federal Reserve charges them to borrow. This is because they want to be safe, because any lack of clarity causes a lot of risk to them in the market, and risk is bad. Investors feel like the Fed has not been very clear about telegraphing their intentions for two primary reasons. One, as job reports and job numbers have come out, they have been consistently revised down this past year every single month to be much worse than expected. And two, as this has happened, the Fed has continued to insist that they're being data dependent and they're not wanting to commit to future cuts, even though the market is screaming that we need to see it. So will rates drop next year? I would say probably, because everyone has really felt what feels like a recession for the last 12 to 18 months. And when the market's in a recession, everything tends to slow down. And so in order to stimulate the economy, what do? We lower interest rates. But don't take my word for it. Besides just the downtrend that we're seeing in the jobs data, we're also seeing an inverted yield curve and the SOM rule being triggered, all of which are three very highly likely indicators that we are already in a recession or will be in one very shortly. So with a potential recession but also lower interest rates on the horizon, is now a bad time or a good time to buy? Well, it depends, as many people have been pointing to this possible wave of quiet foreclosures on the horizon. Specifically, Reventure Consulting, which is generally thought to be a very reliable source for mortgage and real estate data, pointed to the most recent ICE report for delinquency and late payment rates. However, I think this is a very bad indicator for two different reasons. Number one, all the areas that they pointed to as indications of weakness in the market were heavily affected by Hurricane Helene in the months that they pointed to. And two, if you look at the data the Federal Reserve has shared on the credit worthiness of all the new mortgages that have been originated over the past few years, they are quite literally the most credit-worthy mortgages that have ever been originated, primarily because only people that tend to have better income and better credit have been able to get a mortgage the last couple of years. So again, is now a terrible time to buy or potentially a great time to buy? Well, if you don't need to buy right away, then you could potentially benefit from taking extra time to prepare to buy, but we're still expecting modest to high appreciation here in North Carolina over the next 1 to 2 years. So if you needed to buy, you always can refi later to lock in lower interest rates if they do come back down next year as expected. So should you buy now or wait? It really depends on your situation, but either way, 93% of home buyers will regret their decision, because the right choice for you actually has nothing to do with timing and everything to do with 5 other reasons. So watch this video here or you will regret buying your home even if you time it perfectly. Unless you just go and watch this video here.